Welcome to the book interview today on Money Life. I'm very pleased to be joined right now by Michael Hackard. He is the author of Alzheimer's, Widowed Stepmothers, and Estate Crimes: Cause, Action, and Response in Cases of Fractured Inheritance, Lost Inheritance, and Disinheritance. It is subject matter that, well, quite honestly, I hope you never have to live through it. But chances are pretty good that if you don't live through it, someone you know will, in one way, shape, or form. Now, it may not be that they get all the way to the lost and fractured and disinheritance stage, but they could be at the stage where they're wondering, are they going to be treated properly by family members, caregivers, and others? If you want to learn more about the book, go to Michael Hackard's website. That's hackardlaw.com. He's on Twitter, at Michael Hackard. Michael Hackard, welcome to Money Life.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So this is subject matter that, like I said, we'd love to think that it's not going to happen in our family. But the truth is, almost every family that winds up this way thought it's not going to happen in our family, right?
Exactly. People are incredulous when these things first happen. They're amazed and embarrassed that it's happening to their family. Of course, it's very common.
Well, that being the case, you'd like to think that folks are going to take care of these issues and do the right things. But we know that so many people don't do proper estate planning, don't have wills, don't have trusts. And so once you've got a diagnosis that you've got a problem here, at that point, are you of sound mind enough to be able to fix it? I mean, how far along the spectrum can you be before this is fixable? Help my audience understand, where can we be where we can still resolve issues?
Yeah, it has to do with the issue of capacity. And you have a great question because it's befuddling to people in general and oftentimes to lawyers. So when we are speaking with someone who is concerned as to whether their parent or they themselves have capacity, usually it's a child trying to determine if a parent has capacity. There are times that, first of all, you can reach out to their own physicians and ask them whether their patient has capacity to make a trust or a will. And you'll get some responses there. I've done this in some very large estates where I've actually asked the people to go and seek out a geriatric psychiatrist who can help make the determination. And if that's done, the psychiatrist will generally tape the meeting and as between the psychiatrist and the patient. And that's going to be pretty good evidence for the future. And I have had it where they don't have capacity. It's that simple. So you need to figure out something else.
In terms of the issues that are dealt with here, I mean, it's not just straight inheritance issues. It's things like, somebody in the family has a drug addiction, or it's a secondary spouse. And even though assets might have been placed in trust, are the assets going to be spent down so that the surviving spouse basically will wind up getting everything when that wasn't the intention? There's a lot of stuff in here. What are the issues that most people need to deal with first?
I'd say that they first need to have a will. And if their estate is fairly large, or even if it's not that large and say it holds real property, the will should be a pour-over will, which basically says whatever terms are in the trust that they apply. And the other important factor is that if you have a trust, it's important that your assets be actually titled in the trust, because it doesn't help all that much if you have a trust, but after you pass away, your relatives look at it and find, the real property was never put into the trust, or accounts were never put into the trust. So it's a follow-up process even after you create a trust.
In terms of beyond just going the trust route, what are the common mistakes that people make? Because there are so many things I can think of. And as I was looking through the book, I was thinking like, oh, okay, here's a case where you think you've done the right thing by giving somebody power of attorney, but that person is now starting to dip into bank accounts or what have you. And there's sort of every turn, even when you think you're doing the right things, seems to be able to go wrong here.
And of course, and that's what I've written about. And because 90% of our practice is estate and trust and elder financial abuse litigation, we're like the emergency room physicians that see all kinds of injuries almost on a daily basis that a regular or personal physician would never see. So we do see what goes wrong. And the power of attorney is certainly an example. You have to have vigilance over whoever it is that you give your power of attorney to, or your other relatives or friends need to assist in that vigilance, because I've handled several of these where someone's given a power of attorney and the person with the power of attorney basically goes wild and starts transferring both monetary as well as real property assets into their own name, or sometimes even into someone else's name that they want to benefit.
Once that stuff happens, how bad is the recovery process? Because obviously we're going to be spending a lot of money on folks like you to help fix it, but length of time and all these other sorts of things, and not to mention how families are forever fractured. I mean, how bad is the recovery process?
Well, it's bad in the sense that people are going to have to hire a lawyer generally. And usually that means they're going to have to pay that lawyer's hourly rates. And the case is going to be normally filed where the defendant lives. So you may have the victim in one part of the state and the defendant in another. So it's fairly bad. It's a lot better not to have it than to have it. That said, when we do those cases, we hit pretty hard, and I think lawyers that are involved in this, they hit pretty hard, and sometimes you get a fairly quick turnaround because the penalties are fairly severe for someone who has wronged an elder in this way.
The other side of this is that there are a bunch of scams that are out there. And the scams don't seem to be like, hey, it's your relatives who are taking you or what have you. Explain what scams people need to be worried about as they're dealing with everything else that they have to go through when their loved ones get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
Probably many of your listeners have experienced this, though. They get a telephone call, and it's supposedly from the IRS or the local sheriff or whoever, whatever law enforcement agency they want to impersonate. And that's usually, if you don't immediately give us so many dollars, we're sending out a law enforcement person to pick you up and take you to jail. That on its face seems absurd, but you put somebody who's alone in their own home, who can't really check this out with anyone else, and they get very frightened. And so consequently, you see a lot of money going out on these kind of scams. The grandparent scam, that's one that, someone, you get a phone call and someone says that they're your grandchild. So the natural response is you might say, oh, Jimmy? So suddenly that person knows, okay, well, I need to be Jimmy on this one.
Yeah.
And then they need so much money in order to get out of jail or in order to deal with the loss of a passport or whatever it is. The other thing where seniors, but all people are really targeted, but seniors in particular, these computer scams. You get something coming up on your computer and it says, you have a bug, it needs to be fixed, press this. And those scams are so common. And, somebody comes on the line and basically, walks you through your computer where they can grab all of your financial information.
Well,
so those are just some examples.
And you have in the book what you consider to be the best first lines of defense. So share a little bit of that as well in terms of, and we're going to be giving away a couple copies of the book at the end of today's show. But for those who don't have the book and maybe they won't go to get it, but still help them out in terms of what are the lines of defense that you want to make sure that the seniors in your life have. Because Lord knows I've experienced not so much with my late parents, but with my late in-laws, my late former in-laws, where there was some shenanigans going on, some people calling at sundown, doing all those other sorts of things. What is the line of defense you wish everybody knew?
Well, one line of defense is for family members to have transparency. And if nothing else, have someone who's able to see the elder's bank accounts. They may not be able to transfer monies or otherwise, but just have transparency because you can see where money's going out, questionable amounts of money. And I think that's really important. The other thing, which can also identify suspicious withdrawals or ATM cash.
Anything you can do where you're going to wind up seeing it, where you're going to be held accountable, that's going to wind up helping you when the time comes as well. And it's going to help make sure that you don't wind up on the wrong side of this. The book is Alzheimer's, Widowed Stepmothers, and Estate Crimes. cause, action, and response in crimes of fractured inheritance, lost inheritance, and disinheritance. It's out now from Michael Hackard. He's my guest. You can learn more about him and the book at hackardlaw.com, on Twitter at Michael Hackard.